since we have a reputation of being late, we didn't want to disappoint anyone. And so, once again, we are the place. Here's the place of intellectual, spiritual, and scriptural honesty, whatever that means. I think that, in a sense, we're still trying to figure out what that means, and maybe tonight will help some of that. With that said, my wife and I are excited about the show, and since we're starting late, we're going to go directly to one of our co-hosts. That would be Bob Graves. Bob, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fine. Glad to be here.
I loved the show that you did with Greg. I thought Greg was extremely transparent on the show.
Yes.
It was a powerful show. And then you did a wow point on your show. You were so revealing about an experience. Tonight we have Dennis Collis. He's a person we know on Facebook. I've never spent much time on the phone with him. I think we spent maybe 2 minutes before the show. And but he has made many comments. My wife and I are very interested in his theology and why he perceives the Bible to be saying X, Y, and Z, that is, to him. And so tonight we are going to have a discussion about what Dennis perceives to be true concerning Scripture, and I think that without going into too much detail into questions, let's just step up to the plate and have Dennis on the show. Welcome, Dennis.
Thank you very much for having me, Doctor.
Well, thank you so much for being with us. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? I want everyone to be able to get to know you, and you seem like a fun person.
Well, thank you. I'm originally from Utica, New York. I moved down to Florida when I was 20, and then I moved up here to South Carolina about 10 years ago. I became a Christian back in 1972 after being an atheist for about 5 years. Had a very powerful experience with the Lord, and it was quite extraordinary because I went from an atheist to a believer in about less than 5 minutes. And
wow.
And then I've been bouncing around the church scene, which was a lot of craziness out there. And I left the church scene probably about 5 years ago. I just saw a lot of things in the church that I didn't think were biblical. A lot of things going on there that disturbed me and still disturb me to this day. So I am one of the people that has left the church scene totally. I still love Jesus, and I still read the Bible and pray and stuff. But I'm done with church.
That's wonderful. I love the idea of anyone being done with church. I don't think that the institution itself is without a lot of harm, that is, to people and the whole process of learning, etc. I think it's a very disingenuous institution. However, I do feel as if there are some wonderful people there struggling very, very hard to have a meaningful sense of community. Let's go back a little bit. I wasn't aware that you were an atheist at one point in your life. Why did you become an atheist? And you said for a period of 5 years. Were you actually a theist before becoming this atheist? Or tell us a little bit about that.
I was raised Catholic and went to Catholic grammar school and Catholic high school. And when I got in high school, we had what's called Xaverian Brothers. We had nuns in grammar school. And then when I got to high school, they told us what the nuns taught us was a bunch of baloney. And I decided it was all a bunch of baloney. And the one thing that didn't make sense to me was Jesus, they said, died on the cross, and then he came back to life 3 days later. And so I said, all right, well, where's the sacrifice then? He didn't stay dead. And so I had a lot of questions about the whole Christian theology thing and the Bible, and a lot of garbage I was taught in the Catholic Church, and just threw the baby out with the bathwater and just decided it's all a big Santa Claus story. If you're good, you go to heaven. You're bad, you go to hell. So you better be good for goodness sake, because he's watching everything you do. And it was just a big Santa Claus story for adults to make them be good when nobody was watching.
Okay. You stated a few minutes ago that it took about 5 minutes to transition from being an atheist to a theist. Can you describe that 5 minutes?
Yes, I was up at a tennis court in Utica, watching people play tennis, just sitting there. And a friend of mine that I graduated with from high school, this guy was a real nut, real clown. Came and started talking to me about Jesus. And I said, "You got to be kidding me, you?" I said, this guy was just class clown extraordinary, a real goofball. And now all of a sudden he's telling me he's had this experience with Jesus. And for some reason, while he's talking to me, I start crying. And I said, "I don't know what's going on here." He said, "Would you like to pray with me?" And I thought, well, that can't hurt. So I prayed the basic sinner's prayer, I guess you'd call it. And I knew without the shadow of a doubt that all of a sudden I just stood up. I stood up and I said, his name was John. I said, "John, I know Jesus. I believe in Jesus." I was flipping out because I was so fascinated with the fact that I now believed in Jesus after having no clue or really not wanting to know, again for the past 5 years. And all of a sudden here I was, and I knew it beyond the shadow of a doubt. I could feel him. I knew it was real. I don't know if you want to call it a revelation. I don't know what happened, but I knew Jesus all of a sudden, and I couldn't deny it anymore. And it was, I went nuts, running around telling everybody about Jesus for the next 6 months.
Do you think it had anything to do with your prayer or anything like that, or is this just like meeting an individual in a sense?
Well, I look back at that. I don't know that it necessarily had anything to do with the prayer, but I knew, I asked, that I wanted, if Jesus was real. I wanted to know him. It seemed like, this kid certainly seemed like he was having a real experience. And so I think he met me there. I think it was just the Lord's timing to reveal himself to me, and that's how he chose to do it.
Since then, what has been your journey, that is, in theology? Have you maintained the same belief or practiced the same kind of theology for all of these years since that particular 5-minute experience?
No, it's been all over the place. My first experience after I left the Catholic Church, I tried going back to the Catholic Church, and that wasn't working. And my very first experience after I got saved was with a Pentecostal holiness church, Jesus only, and they were way out there, real legalistic.
Let me interrupt you. When you say they're way out there, describe that for a moment for us.
Okay, well, the women couldn't cut their hair. They took 1 Corinthians, what chapter is it, 11, I think. Woman's hair is given to her for glory and all that stuff. And so women didn't cut their hair. They couldn't wear jewelry. They couldn't wear pants. They wore dresses down to their ankles. They wore their hair up in a bun. Men couldn't wear shorts. We'd go out and play basketball. We'd have to wear long pants. We couldn't go. Super legalistic.
Did we lose him?
I got disconnected here, it looks like.
Yeah, we keep getting interruptions, but I'm going to ask you once again. You were saying that you guys could not play basketball without wearing pants. Is that correct?
We had to wear pants. We couldn't wear shorts.
Smoking cigarettes and drinking, I would assume, was not part of the.
That was a mortal sin.
Okay. Back in those days, what was your ideas concerning the Holy Spirit and blaspheming the Holy Spirit? I mean, tell us a little bit more about that experience in the Pentecostal movement?
I don't know necessarily that they considered or they talked about much about blaspheming the Holy Spirit. I was only in the Pentecostal church for about 6 months, and then I backslid for about 2 years. So I don't remember much about their theology. I remember a lot about their legalism, and I remember that they didn't believe in the Trinity. They believed that Jesus was all three. That Jesus is the Father in creation, Son in redemption, Holy Ghost in regeneration. And so that was the main thing I remember from their theology was Jesus only, and their views on the Trinity, which were real strong against the Trinity teachings.
And you moved from that point into backsliding for 2 years, correct?
Backslid for about 2 years. Went to Florida and met a bunch of Christians on the beach one day that were baptizing somebody. And I had kind of been getting back and thinking, I need to get back with the Lord. And I was praying to, find a church. And then I saw them baptizing on the beach there, and they were all in a circle praying. And so I kind of walked up, and they kind of opened their group up and kind of said, "Come on," And so I walked in, and they invited me to come, and that's when I started going back to church again. That was back in 74, 75, somewhere in there.
Okay, what kind of church was that?
It was a charismatic church, non-denominational. It wasn't affiliated with anybody else. It was just a Lone Ranger church. It was kind of a cool place because they let anybody get up. If you wanted to get up and teach, they'd leave an open microphone, and you could get up and teach, you could get up and sing, you could get up and share a testimony. They left an open microphone for a good part of the service where anybody could participate.
Did that include women as well?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, anybody could get up and share whatever they felt was on their heart.
Marvelous.
And from that point, where did you move? That is in your theological journey.
I stayed in Daytona for that entire time until about 10 years ago, and the entire time I was there, I went to a lot of different charismatic churches, Assembly of God churches, non-denominational charismatic churches. I had tried, the Baptists and the Presbyterians, and just didn't like them because they didn't, believe in, prophecy or any of that kind of thing. So I pretty much my whole church life walk was in charismatic type churches.
Did you get involved in speaking in tongues, prophesying, casting out devils, or any of those things?
Yes, all that stuff.
Can you tell us some of those experiences?
Well, we were in one group that the church I told you about that I started in down in Florida. A guy came down, and people considered him an apostle, and he started a group, and he started teaching this thing about the priesthood after the order of Melchizedek. It was kind of a weird little group because they thought that every person was called to one of the 5 main ministries. You were either an apostle, prophet, evangelist, teacher, or shepherd. You were one of those 5. All the men, the women weren't called to those ministries, only the men. And we made up what they called the priesthood after the order of Melchizedek, and we had our priesthood notebooks, and it was a crazy group because they thought it was okay to cuss. They thought it was okay to do just about anything. You could smoke, you could cuss, you could drink, and it was a lot different than what I was used to. So I went from the real legalistic church with the Pentecostal holiness into this cult where just about anything goes. They didn't believe in immorality or anything like that, but you could smoke and drink and cuss and carry on. So they leaned a little more they leaned a little more in the opposite direction. So that was an interesting experience. I was in that for about 10 years.
About 10 years. And from there, where did you move to?
From there, I went to, it was a group called Sovereign Grace Ministries. I don't know if you've ever heard of C.J. Mahaney.
I haven't, to be honest with you.
Oh, that's okay. C.J. Mahaney and Larry Tomzak started a group, and it turned, it's now named today Sovereign Grace Ministries, and I was in that for the following 10 years, and that was my last, and then I went to, just for a little while, to church down in New Smyrna. So I'm trying to think of the denomination. It was a denominational church. I can't remember the name of it now, but I was only there for about a year or two before we came up here to South Carolina, and then I tried one church up here, and that's when I decided I'd had enough of the church. Church
So,
stuff.
am I misreading you? After all of these experiences in various churches, you just said, I don't need any of these churches? Is that where you are now?
Yes, I'd been searching for a while. I've been doing a lot of reading. I read Pagan Christianity, and I was really concerned about, especially the pastoral role in the church today, where the one-man CEO pastor, kind of ran the whole show, and I didn't see that in the Bible. And the book Pagan Christianity really got me searching and stirring as far as what this whole church life was supposed to be about. And the more I read, the more I saw that today's churches are so far away from the Bible. It's incredible.
So would it be fair to say that you place all of your eggs in the basket of the written word?
I don't know if I'd say all of them in the written word. I mean, there's parts of the Bible that, there's one book in particular that I don't think should be in the Bible, 2 Thessalonians. I don't think Paul wrote 2 Thessalonians. I think it's, I think it's written by somebody else. And so, and there's other books that I'm, concerned with. Revelation, I really don't get too much in it, at all. So I'm not a Bible inerrant person by any means, but I do believe that God has spoken a lot of spiritual truth through I don't even know what to call the Bible, because again, there's only one Bible out there that's considered the Bible. The 37 books in the Old, 39 in the Old Testament, and then 27 in the New. And again, I don't necessarily accept all those books. So when I use the term Bible, I guess I have to use it loosely.
Bob, do you have any comments so far?
Oh, wow. Sounds like Dennis has had quite a journey, a number of different organizations. And I was just curious, Dennis, would you say there was any common theme that you found in all of those different places where you explored?
You mean church-wise?
Yeah. Do you think that there was something similar or common in all of them that attracted you, or something you were looking for?
Well, I think the main thing I got from the church life was just the fellowship. I look back at it, and I miss the people. I got a lot of friendships. There's people I keep in touch with to this day that I met in the churches I was involved in, and so that's something I take away. That was the good part of it. The good part was, friendships. I met my wife at church, which she is a tremendous blessing. We've been married for 32 years, and I met her at the first church I went to down in Florida. And so I realized that God used that to develop relationships and friendships. And other than that, things I took away were, just realizing that the diversity was tremendous. The diversity of doctrine, the diversity of how people figured church was to be done, the styles of worship, the styles of leadership, how it was set up. It was pretty much, somebody started a church and it was, they determined how church was meant. It wasn't based on anything biblical. They just kind of said, well, let's do this and let's do that, and so it seemed to me like all the churches are just man-made, man-made religious groups that really aren't based too much on being set up by the Bible, that's for sure.
When you say the Bible, set upon the Bible, do you think that the Bible itself is a document that can be understood?
Well, to a point. I guess it's no. It's the Old Testament for me is I don't read the Old Testament hardly at all. I'll read the Psalms and Proverbs a little bit, But the Old Testament to me is way out there and bizarre. I don't get a lot of the Old Testament. Jesus spoke mainly to the Jews when he was, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John is all Jesus ministering to the Jews, and there's not too much about the church. So I mainly, when I read the Bible, I try to stick to Paul's letters. That's where I spend 99% of my time is reading, Romans, Corinthians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, all of Paul's letters. He was the apostle to the Gentiles, and I'm a Gentile, so so that's where I spend my time when I do read the Bible.
When you look at some of Paul's terms and the words of Christ, it's obvious that they are referring to what the ancients perceived to be true. I would argue that it's more or less oral tradition rather than a written understanding of the intent of any of the authors. And that brings me to a question, because I think that essentially people are moving in a particular direction, but maybe before I ask this question, what is your position or your ideas concerning salvation? Do you think people need to be saved?
I think everyone will be saved. I believe that when Jesus died on the cross, that he took the wages of sin, which was death, that he was the last Adam. The first Adam brought sin and death into the world. The last Adam, Jesus Christ, brought righteousness and to all mankind. I look at sin as a cancer that got into the human race, and that Jesus came and removed that cancer through his obedience, through his victory over death, that he came to reconcile what Adam screwed up. He came and undid that. He undid the sin of Adam for all mankind. I don't believe in hell. I think hell's a false teaching. People read Gehenna and translate that as hell. Gehenna is not hell. Hades is not hell. Sheol's not hell. The lake of fire is not hell. The eternal fire is not hell. People take all these things and they have twisted it into this perverted doctrine of eternal torment, which is nowhere to be found in the scriptures. And that's one doctrine that the church teaches today that I think is tremendously gross and perverted, and in need of dire correction.
Okay, when you say the last Adam and the first Adam, for some of our audience, they may not understand that particular doctrine, and let me just fill in the blanks and see if you agree. You're talking about the first Adam being the one in the book of Genesis, am I correct?
That's correct.
And the last Adam would be Jesus Christ. Do you think or perceive that because of the first Adam, all of us were born into sin?
Yes, it's kind of like a disease that gets handed down through our DNA, if you will. Just like people are born with certain traits or malfunctions physically that they inherit from their parents. I think the whole human race inherited a lot of sinful conditions from Adam, spiritually and physically, and Jesus came to reverse that, the curse, the cancer of sin.
Now let's talk about the curse and the cancer of sin as you are defining it or speaking about. If I were, let's say for the sake of argument, if I were the first Adam and I was God's created son, and my wife was, let's say my wife was my wife, that is Eve, in the garden, and we went out and we were enjoying the day, and a talking snake comes up to us and tells us this little story, and we choose to eat a piece of fruit. Is your suggestion that sin is actually coming into the world because we disobeyed God, that is by eating a piece of fruit?
Well, I know that some people take that literally. I don't necessarily look at that as a literal reading in Genesis. I don't know that there's a literal tree of the knowledge of good and evil, a literal talking snake, serpent, however you want to look at it. I think a lot of that is allegorical. Why it's written like that, I don't know. I can't explain that. I don't have all the answers as far as how Genesis was written and why it was written the way it was written and its exact meaning. But I do believe that, Romans, Paul talks about sin coming in, through Adam. Romans 5:18 is a very powerful verse that I, look at a lot, that, condemnation came in through one man, and then through another man, Jesus Christ, came in, justification to life. So again, the main thing for me is that Jesus undid whatever entered into Adam, if you want to call him the first man or mankind in general, or whatever Adam means to you, or if you think it's symbolic or whatever, that something went wacky.
Okay.
Something went wacky in mankind that Jesus had to come and straighten out.
Okay, the condemnation that you're referring to, where is that condemnation coming from? Are we talking about condemnation coming from God?
I don't know. I don't think the condemnation is from God. I think the condemnation comes from sin consciousness, from our deception, from our being estranged from God, afraid of God. People have all kinds of wacky ideas about what God wants, and he's just up there, and again, the whole hell issue. If God was, hey, you love me or I'm going to send you to hell, and then they call that a free will choice. Yeah, you're going to go to hell unless you love God. That's free will, and it'd be like me telling my wife, hey, either you love me or I'm going to, throw you in the fireplace, or telling my kids that.
Right. So if condemnation did not come from God in any sense of the word, what are people getting saved from?
I think they're getting saved from bondage to sin. You look at the condition of the world today, and it's very obvious. You got more serial killers today than we've ever had. Every day in the news, it seems like you're hearing about somebody that's killed 2 or 3 people, killing their families, going into a workplace and, shooting a whole bunch of people. Serial killers were a dime a dozen when I was growing up. You very rarely heard about them. Now it seems like they're in the news every day. So,
But, we do have, biblically, we do have serial killers throughout the Old Testament,
Yes.
even commanded by God to do a serial killing spree. We have, the doctrines of infanticide, genocide, even the doctrines of slavery throughout the Old Testament. We even have Elisha, who is walking down the road, and the 42 little kids or children, however old they were, is actually superfluous to the point. But they call him Baldy, and then Elisha the prophet curses the children, and God sends 2 she-bears to maul them to death. And so when we pick up the Bible, and I'm talking about the Bible in English, and we look at it and we look at these stories, I don't care whether you use a system of allegory or not, it's obvious that someone's doing some killing, and according to the text, that is the English text, God is doing lots and lots of killing, and even commanding other people to kill like he kills. And so when you square it up at the end of the day, God, hands down, has killed more people than Satan ever did. And so when we have people today who commit something similar to the God of the Old Testament, how do we square that up?
Well, you got to realize that people that are killing today are killing for fun. They're killing for the joy of it. They're killing because they are demented. They're killing because they're wacko. I trust that if, again, I'm not an Old Testament person, and I know there's a lot of strange things back there. But if and when God did kill anybody, his knowledge and his judgments are perfect. So if he killed somebody, he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what they were going to turn out to be. I mean, if he would have killed Hitler as a child, would you have been upset that he killed Hitler as a child, knowing what Hitler was going to do later on in his life?
Yes, I mean, I think killing is wrong. I don't care who does it. And I don't think there is any justification whatsoever, Dennis, to kill, especially God. I mean, he is one who, in the form of Jesus, tells us to, be long-suffering and patient and kind. And I don't see those attributes of the Yahweh of the Old Testament.
Well, if you've got, let's say in your household, let's say one of your children was getting ready to stab your husband, slit his throat, what would you do to that child?
I would try to restrain him from doing that.
Okay, and so let's say you, if his life was in danger, and you had a gun in your hand, and he's getting ready to slice your husband's throat, what are you going to do at that point with that gun?
Well, I don't know. I'd probably shoot him in the butt or something. But but that's really not apples, and apples, because God commanded people to, allegedly in the Old Testament, to kill these bears, to come on these children and maul them just for calling somebody a name. So that's really not egalitaric to the God examples in the Bible.
Also, if I could say something here, that although I can certainly empathize with Dennis and his desire to somehow find a way of making sense of all this, but it would seem to me that if Rhonda's standing there and has a gun in her hand, and someone is trying to slice the throat of Michael, but God has more than just a gun in his hand, and we would think that the skill set, the options that would belong to God would cause the need to be killing someone to be a radically last case scenario. And yet I think in the Old Testament we see so much death, and not just so much death, but it bothers me when people can overlook the fact that almost all of the killing that we see in the Old Testament has to do with really protecting the religion,
right,
protecting the nationalism of the country, and giving them permission to take a land that didn't belong to them because God was giving it to them. And so they're killing all the people for, they say, well, because they're sacrificing their children, and they're doing this, and they're doing all kinds of evil things. I personally don't think that it's even psychologically possible for the early Hebrews to be doing that killing without that having some radical impact on who they are psychologically as a people. So I got to be honest with you, when I read all that killing in the Old Testament, it strikes me as a bunch of men trying to justify some horrible things they did in order to become a nation.
Exactly.
That's how it hits me.
Yeah. For instance, the story of Jephthah, he makes a deal with God. If you will allow me to kill the Ammonites, all of them, commit genocide and infanticide, actually, I will kill the first person who walks out of the front door of my home. And when he gets home from committing infanticide and genocide, he has to kill, actually, his daughter because she is the first to walk out. And it upsets him. And so, I would be upset too, but, the thing that upsets me is someone trying to make a deal, that is to commit genocide and infanticide. And so those things bother me, Dennis, when I find, Samuel, the prophet that speaks to the first king of Israel, go and kill all of this one particular group of people, kill the men, the women, the children, and even the infants with a sword. And we find throughout the Old Testament, they would actually rip the bellies of pregnant women open and actually take the babies and throw them up against the rocks. And so when you start reading story after story after story after story, slaughter after slaughter, and, it's like with Noah and the ark, God kills everyone but 8 people. How can we say that's just? How can we say that's moral or even sane?
Like I said before, I don't spend a lot of time in the Old Testament. I mean, I spend my time, again, 99% reading the letters of Paul, to the apostle to the Gentiles. I don't get hung up on the Bible. I can throw the Old Testament out for all I care. I mean, people seem to get all hung up on all these weird stories in the Old Testament, and they make their judgments of God. They throw out Christianity. They throw out everything because of all these weird Old Testament stories. Nobody ever wants to talk to me about Paul's letters to the Gentiles. Nobody's pointing out anything weird. Nobody's pointing out any, abortions or murders or, ripping babies out or, slavery or any of that stuff. It all seems to hang up on Old Testament stories. And I admit there's a lot of weird stuff back there. And do I know how to explain it all? No, I don't.
Right.
But I'm not going to throw God out, and I'm not going to throw the rest. I'm not going to throw the New Testament out because there's weird stuff in the Old Testament, because that doesn't really relate to me. I don't. My faith isn't dependent on all those weird stories in the Old Testament. That doesn't shake my faith whatsoever.
Is Jesus? I'm sorry.
Okay,
Go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Randy's
go ahead.
here, and let's get him in the conversation. Go ahead, Randy.
Now, Jesus is his words and his wisdom, teachings, and so forth. That's what you believe in, correct?
No.
Okay, so
No, Jesus taught to the Jews. I believe in Paul's letters, again, to the
so
Gentiles.
you worship
Jesus-
you would rather follow Paul than Jesus. So how is that related
Absolutely.
to the church?
Absolutely.
I don't understand.
Jesus spoke to the Jews who were still under the law.
Mm-hmm.
Most of what Jesus spoke to was he said, I've not been sent except to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. He never spoke to Gentiles. He didn't teach Gentiles. He didn't send his apostles to the Gentiles. He forbade them to go to the way of the Gentiles.
But wasn't his
Jesus-
father the one, the Almighty God, the one that Paul is promoting? So Paul's promoting him, but the person who is directly in that line of ascension is not worthwhile to listen to, but Paul is. That
It's not that it's not
I don't
worthwhile
understand.
listening to. You
I
have
mean,
to
you're
take
throwing
what
away the
he's
Old
saying
Testament, but
and
that's
put
the
it in its proper
foundation for
context,
everything
which was
that
the
everyone
Jews under
believes.
the law. What Jesus said had nothing to do with the New Testament assembly to Christianity. Jesus spoke to the Jews who were still under the law. He hadn't died on the cross yet. The new covenant hadn't taken place yet. The Holy Spirit hadn't been poured out yet. None of that stuff had taken place while Jesus was on the earth. Everything changed after his death and resurrection. That's when the new covenant starts. Everything that Jesus spoke to the Jews was still according to the law, according to the Old Testament, according to the law of Moses, and he taught them some things about what it really meant, where they made mistakes and stuff. But the New Testament church, I don't even like the word church, the New Testament body of Christ, Holy Spirit filled believers, didn't start until after the day of Pentecost.
Well, Dennis, do you believe that Paul actually had an encounter with Jesus, and Jesus gave and poured himself out to Paul and gave him all this knowledge and information?
Yes, I do.
Okay, alrighty. And the only reason I brought up some of those Old Testament things is because it sounded like you were trying to make a case for God, and his killing, and I just wanted to say I didn't think that was, legitimate.
Right. Well, if he did kill, again, I don't, my faith, again, isn't based on what the New Testament says or what it doesn't say. I don't understand a lot of it, and, but I know if it is true, if God decided to kill somebody, again, he knew the end from the beginning. He knew what those people were going to be like. We got people that are terrorists today trying to kill us. If God knew them at a young age of 13 or 17 or whatever, and knew they were going to grow up and terrorize people, and decided I'm going to put them out of their misery right now. That's God's judgment. I'm not going to question what God does or how He does it. I trust in God. I have faith in God. He changed my life. He renewed my life. And again, I don't get hung up on all the weird Old Testament stuff, because that stuff doesn't really affect me or apply to me. I'm not Jewish. I'm not living under the Old Covenant. I'm in the New Covenant. And so, those stories, I take them with a grain of salt.
In the book of Luke, chapter 19, verse 27, Jesus makes this statement. I would like to hear your opinion concerning what Jesus said here. But bring here these enemies of mine, who did not want me to rule over them, and slaughter them in my presence. What is your opinion as to what has taken place here?
I don't know. I'd have to read the context again. Again, like I said before, with the Gospels, Jesus speaking to the Jews, I don't spend a lot of time in the Gospels either. I spend my time in Paul's letters. So I'd have to read the context, and I'm not sure what Jesus was speaking to there, but I could, do some research on it later if you want me to. But right now, I don't really have an answer.
Do you think, when you were talking about the first Adam and the last Adam, do you think that Paul was building the premise of the first Adam based upon what the Old Testament is saying? Or do you think that he was simply building a model trying to do away with the mindset of the Old Testament?
No, I don't think he's he definitely countered a lot of the Old Testament beliefs, because the Jews were still going to the temple. They still wanted to practice circumcision and temple rituals, and maybe tithing and who knows what. They are, the Jews had been in that religious mindset for centuries. And then Paul comes along and says, hey, I'm going to change all that. Yeah, well, who are you? Who are you, Paul, to come along and say you're going to change what we've been doing for thousands of years, and now you're going to come and start some new religion here? What, and Paul got a lot of grief over what he came with. A lot of them rejected his apostleship and, thought he was just, Lone Ranger out here blowing smoke. And so, it was a very hard transition for Jews who were so engulfed and ingrained in Judaism for centuries to now listen to some, one guy come along and say, hey, Jesus told me something different here that he didn't tell you guys. And so we're changing everything.
Okay.
So they
now,
probably just thought he was a cult leader or something.
There was a discussion on our wall, and I may be mistaken, I thought that you were advocating that the Bible didn't have any contradictions in it, or am I wrong?
I do believe that. Again, my focus is on the New Testament. Again, there's probably a ton of stuff in the Old Testament you could come up with that could say there's contradictions, but most of the contradictions that people try to tell me are in the Bible, I think there's very easy explanations for. Nobody with their contradictions wants to come and, say Jesus had 15 apostles, or, Jesus was born in Saudi Arabia. All the contradictions are real small, insignificant stuff that I don't see really matters. I don't see any great discrepancies. I thought if there's going to be some contradictions, let's have something big again. Like, Jesus has got 25 apostles in one book, and over here he's got 10 apostles, and someplace else he's got 3 apostles. You don't see any major discrepancies. People want to talk about what day he died on and what day he rose on, and and silly things that are easily explained. That again don't really seem to me to be contradictions whatsoever.
So the Bible is written by man. It is not divinely inspired. It is subject to the fallibility of a human author. Is that what you're saying?
No, I believe it is divinely inspired. I believe there's fallacies in translation. There's a lot. I look at the translations today. I spend a lot of time trying to look at the Greek and learning Greek grammar, and I'm not a linguist by any means, but I spent a lot of time trying to read about hermeneutics and exegesis and linguistics and learn the Greek language to a point. Again, I didn't become an expert in it, but I look at the translations today, and they're hideous. Some of the things that the translations say versus what the Greek says, and it's so far apart, it's not even funny. So yeah, I could say, what these guys? These guys are supposed to be learned men that are translating the New American Standard and the King James and all these other translations that are out there, and there's contradictions between translations because these people are arguing over what the Greek means.
Well, I've got a curiosity question because there are over 400,000 textual variants within the New Testament alone. And
Right.
a lot of those textual variants are within the context of the Pauline corpus. And so I want to know how you would reconcile a lot of variants. In other words, they're not in agreement, they're not working in concert. One would be found in Romans chapter 4. If we read from the King James Version, which is based upon a completely different text base, that is
Right.
the Greek, we're going to read a translation model that was actually a direct technique model of translating, and it reads this way. It says, "And being not weak in faith, he considered not his own body now dead." When I read the NIV, which comes from a completely different text base, and it deals with the variants in a much different way, it reads this way: "Without weakening in his faith, he considered, or he faced the fact that his body was as good as dead." And so those two things are not saying the same thing. And so when you do look at the Greek, you find, for instance, in Romans chapter 5, verse 1, and I can turn there. If I read the Greek text, it says, "Dekauthentis unek pisteos eronein ekomen prostan thean diatu kuriou hemon Jesu Christou." There is a textual variant that's very important to this text, ekomen versus ekomen. And so there is a lot of contention or things that are not in concert, which would lead us in a different way, doctrinally speaking. And so what's the deal with it? Why are we not, as theists, willing to look at the evidence and say, wow, these manuscripts are all over the place and they are not leading us to the same conclusions?
Well, if you look at the ones you brought up, I mean, the textual variance between the Alexandrian text and the majority text that the King James uses, I for one prefer the Alexandrian text. I realize again there's tons of variants, but most of them are incredibly insignificant. Christ Jesus versus Jesus Christ.
But I did not bring up.
Variants.
Okay,
Most
but
of-
in
most
Romans
of the
5,
variants are
in Romans
very
5:1, I
minuscule.
did not bring up an insignificant variant.
Okay, what is significant about the variant that you
Well,
brought
it
up?
play-
What does that do to you doctrinally?
Well, first of all, it places justification in a very different position. That is the doctrine of justification if we keep the same gloss. And so if timing sequence, in other words, time sensitivity is important, that is, in determining the meaning of the text, and it is, and target sensitivity is. This textual variant is huge in determining what Dikaiothesis is. And so the question would be, why can't we at least be honest enough to say, wow, we really don't know?
Okay, explain that to me. I want you to, if you could, explain the variance and what you see as the contradiction or the two variables in those translations.
Okay, I'm simply trying to provide you with enough information simply to say one would lead us to believe that justification is a thing of the past, and one would lead us to believe that justification is something that could take place possibly in our future with subsequent action. And so one would indicate that subsequent action can't be a reality. The other one would say that it can be a reality. In other words, one would be iterative, one would not be iterative.
Okay.
That's very clear.
You know, and again, you can, take those variables. We've still got the whole rest of Romans to deal with, to reconcile what does the text say, what does Paul say in the rest of Romans and in the rest of his letters. So we can take justification and look at it in its entirety through his whole corpus of text and not rely on one textual variant and say, we got one variant here that's kind of throwing us off, just like what we just had in the George Zimmerman case. That thing, I watched that thing from front to end, and you got all these witnesses coming forward telling all these different stories, and they're having to piece together this whole thing. I don't think the Bible's much different when it comes to textual variants, because like you said, we've got, thousands of manuscripts today, with all kinds of variants. And so what do we have to do? We have to go piece the puzzle together. And we have to say, all right, what did Paul say here? What did he say over here? What does this text say? What does that text say? What do we have? And you do an investigation. You do a CSI. You get finely detailed into what the text says, what it doesn't say, who said it, why it said, what's it say over here, what's it mean here. And it takes a lot of work to dig and to find out what the original thing. Like when I go and I read Isaiah 53 in the Septuagint, it reads totally different than the other text, and I prefer the Septuagint much better than much preferred over the other text. So there's again, I don't think there's any discrepancy that you can find in textual variants can be easily handled by piecing the whole puzzle together.
Okay, you keep talking about, this is a CSI thing, and I would love to put it all together and say that we have certitude, but I can't, simply because there are various things that concern me, and let me mention just a few of them. Okay. For instance, when we talk about the lack of indexical and deictic elements, I've never been able to have anyone who has ever been able to come clean on that. That is, for people who would argue that we have a reliable text. What I mean by that is when you look for non-linguistic elements, where are the non-linguistic elements? That is, that would satisfy all of the things that we need that are essential in determining what Paul actually said. And we don't have those things.
If I could interject here.
Certainly.
I get the impression, and Dennis can correct me if I'm wrong, he's not so much attaching himself to the condition of the words of the text, but that there is a text, and that there is in the midst of it this message that can be extracted, and I think that's where I get the impression that's where he's placing his sense of the message, and that the condition of the text is not something that he's worried about nor making a claim about. That I get that impression. Would that be right, Dennis? Did I say that in a way that?
I think that's fairly accurate. There is an overall message that you get from Paul's letters. I know what
Right. And his loyalty is to that
so
message that he may have to actually dig out, which would not therefore contain certitude, but the only certitude it contains is that you certainly must work hard to search it through. And I get the impression that, Dennis, you would also say that having searched it through, you're not necessarily banking on the conclusions you have. They're just working conclusions for now. Would that be also true?
I think that's also true. It's a work in progress for sure.
Yeah.
Speaking of justification, when Paul talks about justification by faith, a lot of people say, well, you have to believe to be saved. But that's not really what the text, it doesn't say, you're justified by your faith. If you look at the phrase pistis Christou, which is the faith, some people translate it faith in Jesus, but it also can be the subjective genitive, which is faith of Jesus. I believe we're saved by his faith. We were saved by his faithfulness, his obedience, what he did on the cross. It's not about us. It's not about us believing. It's not about us having faith. It's not all this stuff that the church teaches. You got to do this and you got to do that and jump through all these hoops and get baptized and do all this stuff. Jesus is the one who provided justification. We're justified by what Jesus did, not by what we do.
Okay, but I guess my point is the subjective and the objective genitive, that wasn't a thing that any of the people in the first century understood. And so in a sense what we're doing is we're manipulating the text to make our own theology. And is that being honest?
What do you mean they didn't understand that in the first century?
You have no linguist to date who would ever argue that the subjective nor the objective genitive ever existed in the first century. No one understood that kind of lingo. That is a meta-language that was developed more recently. And my point is,
but
people
the
were not
meaning is still the same.
No.
It either means faith in Jesus or it means the faith of Jesus. So they understood either one of those two things.
No, that's not possibly true, because number one, that is not adequately wrestling with actually the preposition appropriately, that is according to Reconstruction models. And this is where a lot of people have really gone wrong, because they have used a direct technique of modeling the text instead of realizing that Greek isn't identical to English. And so we can't apply English rules to Greek and get a proper understanding. And my point is, many people in theology, and I have talked with Dr. Carlton Winberry as one who authored a grammar who talks about the subjective and objective genitive, and I called him and I said, Dr. Winberry, I love you and I appreciate you, but why in the world did you inject that? He said, I simply wrote it to satisfy Southern Baptist doctrine. I said, it's not even remotely close to the text. He said, I know that. He said, I was paid to do a job. And so my point is, linguists sometimes write for people who want something to be satisfied, that is, in their theology, and that happens most of the time. However, there are linguists who really don't have a theological agenda. They are simply, people who are lexical theorists. And so being a lexical theorist, that's what I am, we don't have a bone to pick with theology. We just want to look honestly at the text. And once again, we do not have, in most cases, a non-linguistic model to work with. And we have various things that are just not there, and we're not capable of putting the analysis to it.
Dr. Jones, could
certainly jump in.
I would understand that many of the cases, as we might find them in the Greek New Testament, to possess, as we impose upon it, an artificial structural relationship. And I wouldn't go so far personally as to say that some of these implications didn't exist. It's just that those implications were would have been more clear based on usage, that they didn't communicate by some loyalty to some sort of case structure.
Right.
Not to say that they couldn't have a preposition that would mean of, or a preposition would mean in. It's just that we wouldn't know whether it's of or in any given case unless we're familiar with the usage of that particular context, and it varied considerably, and as a result, we're kind of left in the dark. So it wasn't clear to me if you were saying that it didn't exist, or that it doesn't exist with a way in which we can identify it.
I'm simply saying that what has been described, that is, as the subjective and objective Genesis idea,
It's creating a category out of a form that doesn't exist.
Yeah, and
Right.
and I'm simply saying that Lou and Nita, for instance, they make a wonderful argument about case not equaling function, and Dana.
Right.
Dr. Dana was one who really articulated the argument well. And unfortunately, I think that most people really get into the rhythm. It's of the faith of Christ. It's his faith, not my faith. And that's a lot of jargon rather than something that's really truly examining the text. And I'm simply saying there's really there's nothing about that we can be certain about. And number two, the idea of the term faith being
of possibility, but I would agree with you that there's certain nothing there we could be certain of. Yeah.
But the genitive used, for instance, with Jesu Christu, in those cases is really subject to more non-linguistic issues than not because of the overuse of it.
Definitely.
And so if we don't have that, we don't have certitude. And
That's
however, when we have people who are dogmatic about the text and say, well, this is actually faith, and this is the faith of Christ, not my faith, they want to make a bragging point that simply isn't, you can't build a valid premise for that.
This
That's what
is
it-
entire
Right, based on structure.
Right. And so
Right.
I'm simply saying there's much more to this. It's not just usage, because we have to look at it from the externalist viewpoint. Those are the linguists who work with usages, but there is another side of linguistics that deals with the nativist viewpoint or the internalist, because much of this is actually built in the mind itself. And so we have to consider both camps and put these things together, because there isn't a lexical theory or a meaningful or meaning theory that can actually be built based upon the externalist mindset, that is, on usages alone. You would have to look, first of all, at the genome factor with what's called the internalist view. And Noam Chomsky would back that up, and also Descartes would also back that up.
Yeah, we're groping
jump
in the
back in there a
dark.
minute?
Yeah.
Yeah, jump in, Dennis, and we have so many people, having comments and questions. We don't want to dismiss that, and we do
Right.
want to read a lot of these comments. And by the way, my wife and I are really excited that you're on the show. You're willing to put what you think to be true on the table, and I don't want you to feel badgered or beat down because we
Not at
raise
all.
questions. We don't have to agree. We just want to have fun. We love you. We appreciate you. Some of the things that you're saying are just awesome. But here at the place, we want to be honest. Where are we really at? Do we really have everything that we claim that we have? And so
Okay,
go
well,
ahead and make your
I
point.
just wanted to address the pistis Christou and the subjective and objective genitive, but I think the bottom line is that I think it's very obvious through all the teachings of the New Testament that Jesus is the focus of the gospel. The gospel is about, Jesus dying on the cross. So we can take everything that Paul said and take the gospels and everything, and we say, it's about Jesus. It's about what he did. It's about his obedience, his faithfulness unto death on the cross. There's just a ton of scriptures that talk about his faithfulness, his obedience, and what he did. And so even apart from whether we want to debate, faith of Christ or faith in Christ, I think the complete composite of teaching on the subject shows that his death is what saves us. We couldn't save ourselves. We had no ability to save ourselves. So it's not about what we do or what we believe in or anything else. It's about what Jesus Christ did. The church puts all this emphasis today on man's response to the gospel. If you don't respond, then you're not going to get saved. I don't think God left salvation up to our puny human, what they call free will, and said, well, you decide, you want to go to heaven or you want to go to hell. Jesus took care of the sin issue. The sin issue was taken care of. The death issue was taken care of. He did it. He was faithful. We aren't. He was obedient. We aren't. He's the one that provided salvation. We don't provide it for ourselves. We don't take it. We don't accept it. We don't do anything. It's a done deal. Salvation is done. It is finished. Jesus said it is finished. He meant it. It's finished. It's a done deal.
When I think about what you're saying, and I used to be in your very shoes years ago before 1982, and I changed my mind completely about what you're articulating. I had to seriously examine some evidence. I had to look at all of the synthetic models of translation theory. And it's certainly true that there are various synthetic models of translation theory that did come out of an era of time that preceded what we call the Port Royal grammarians. And it was a time in which people would utilize Greek in the context of Holy Ghost Greek. It was a very pitiful kind of style of Greek. And they did come up with conclusions like that, and they did make arguments like you're making tonight. However, that has been almost completely dismissed by all, even Bible Belt translators and linguists, and I can name one of them. Dr. Harris from Dallas Theological Seminary has renounced everything that is the synthetic models that you're working from and articulating the theology out of. He has renounced that. He's simply saying that it's no more than something that needs to be used as a doorstop. And so we have to understand that the reconstruction models of the text have been benefited much in every way because thousands upon thousands of manuscripts have been found, not just biblical, but extra-biblical manuscripts. And now we have a better ability to wrestle with syntax. We have a better ability to wrestle with it all simply because we have been provided so much, much, much more evidence. And so with the evidence, things are changing rapidly. And this is why, Bruce Metzger and people like Dr. Ann Nyland are writing radically different concerning, the idea of salvation. I don't think that we need to get saved because I don't find that to be an authentic understanding of the Greek text. I don't think that Jesus died for my sins either. I don't think that he needed to atone for my sins. I don't think that Adam brought sin into the world and we're all born into sin. I think that's more mythology, and that's something that the church gave to us. And that's something that people who didn't understand or comprehend various ideas brought to us. But I would like to get some. Bob, did you want to make a comment? I heard you.
No. I'm enjoying the conversation so far. I do think I like a lot of what Dennis is saying, and I'm seeing him in a process that
Certainly
is obviously not over. And I think he's headed in just some great directions. And I don't know that his background or level of expertise is ever going to require of him some appreciation for some of the problems that can exist in the language, which I agree with you are so considerable as to leave us really groping in the dark when we're reading this text. It's definitely saying something, but without our connection with that culture more directly, we're really making it up as we go along or grabbing at just possibilities. But I think that it's very likely that as Dennis continues this, that I think there's some ways in which you might disagree with him now that he'll end up actually agreeing with you later, just as the natural process of the process he's in. It's going to lead to that kind of understanding, and I guess Dennis, I see is you've really been dealing with a lot of these things that you've been taught, and that you experimented with, and you tried, and you ended up rejecting. And I do think, though, that there's some ways in which you're trying still to approach the text as if somehow it really does have some coherent, if we could only find it, some real coherent consistency. But I would try to suggest to you that maybe that's just us trying to do something that can't be done and that doesn't need to be done. It's good enough that we can see from the text that things were going on, and you know, I certainly believe in Jesus, but I don't know what necessarily to believe about him. I just see this as a dynamic moment in history that shifted many things, and you know. So anyway, where do you picture yourself, say, 15 years from now, in terms of the way you're thinking? What would you predict would change in the way you're thinking about either Jesus or the biblical text?
Well, that's a good question. I can't see into the future. I know of changes have been radical for me over the past 5 years. Again, just getting out of the church scene and getting away from the brainwashing that they provided. So yeah, I dug into the text. I've read Metzger. I've read tons of stuff about how the Gospels were put together, how the Bible was put together. The manuscripts. I read like crazy. I spent hours and hours and hours studying the Greek and, like I said, hermeneutics and how the Bible was put together. And I started questioning certain books in the Bible, whether they should have even been there. I know that Martin Luther didn't like the book of James and put it in the appendix. There's a lot of Bibles that leave out the book of Revelation because they don't like it. But again, when I look at Paul's letters, the only one I wrestle with, like I said, is 2 Thessalonians. I read 2 Thessalonians, and I don't think Paul wrote it. And I can read other manuscripts, like the Gospel of Thomas and some of these other ones that people wrestled with, and I can say, well, that's not adding up here. There's no correlation between what Paul's saying in his letters to what these other people are saying. So I can put Paul's letters together as a whole, again excluding 2 Thessalonians, and see a consistent train of thought, a consistent truth, a consistent doctrine, and I see no contradictions, no variables where I sit there and scratch my head and go, Paul, what the heck? You said this over here, and now you're saying this over here. What's the deal here? I may have had that in certain parts at one point, but I've been able to reconcile all of Paul's teachings in all of his letters except for 2 Thessalonians.
Uh-huh. So Paul's basically your anchor with this.
Oh, absolutely.
I did. To be honest, all of this conversation really only strengthens my disbelief. I'm speaking as an atheist. I don't know if Dennis knows that I'm atheist, but it should be pretty apparent. But I think about the United States Constitution when I hear you speak, when I hear all three of you speak. And I think about the fact that it is a text that is written in English not that long ago. We can find the documentation. We know what the grammar was. We can understand it. But yet there are droves of people who make their living interpreting that. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's a simple, short text compared to the Bible. Now, if there is an powerful, or however you envision God, who is trying to set forth some sort of guidelines for people to live by, it's kind of like writing the rules to a game where every paragraph is in a different language and not everybody speaks those languages. How can you win or even participate if 99% of the people who are supposed to be participating can't make sense of it, even the supposed experts?
Well, let me address that for a moment. The reason that scientists are able to work together quickly has to do with the determinate language. And one of the unique things about us all, there's something that's a complexity that just is, and it's called linguistic creativity, and we all use it. And because of that, we get into what we call just common language usage. And because common languages are so ambiguous, that is, in nature, it's extremely hard to get people on the same page. So if, for the sake of argument, if you are God, what would you do? Give a determinate language? Would you design the determinate language? Because
well, I would
because
certainly
today
create something
we-
that doesn't cause people to kill each other because they don't agree
Well,
on it.
I guess my point is,
definition.
if you were trying to relate, for instance, I rarely see any parent, if at any point in time, I don't see parents attempting to use a determinate language to speak to their children. And they work with them, that is, within the language structure that they understand. And so I think that if you do have a text that's attempting to work with different people groups in various ways, that is, to speak on their level, to me that is extremely meaningful. Because back in those days, one of the things that's incredible about the works of Christ is that he was attempting to move people forward so they would practice what we're practicing today in science and other things like that. And it's in other words, when you are speaking to people who are using, in a sense, an esoteric mindset, like the Jews, and it's very narrow, it's shallow, it doesn't make the point, and so they have the defense for all the killing sprees, the infanticide, the genocide, and the slavery, etc. It's very difficult to deal with them. It takes time. It's just like dealing with people who have been in the bondages of slavery. It takes time to move them forward, and I think you would agree with that.
Oh, absolutely.
And so
why would a God, a supreme being, however you want to define him, put something that is so confusing, so divisive, so destructive, and so contrary to what supposedly the goals, are? Aren't we supposed to be living, peacefully together, loving thy neighbor, and so forth, having rational discourse?
Well, I think that Jesus is the one who did come to give us the ability to reason things through and to think above our mindsets of theism. For instance, there is one writer in the New Testament who says that Jesus actually emptied himself of the God notions. In other words, let's get rid of the term God for a while. Maybe we can think a little bit clearer. We don't need a Lord reigning over anyone. And so he was moving people into another dimension of thought. And the same thing is true with Paul.
But
Paul,
all these people that call themselves Christians are so far from that mindset.
Oh, darn thing, yes.
yes,
Dr.
but
Jones,
that's a
could I-
religious mindset that has taken us back pre-Christ.
Could I
Go
speak
for
to
it,
that?
Bob. Yes.
I think that part of what you're talking about with the determinate language really applies to this conundrum here, and that is that we're talking about a language, when we're talking about the language of the Greek New Testament, a language that was a common living free tongue that was, as is true of all languages, free to just evolve and alter in any direction that it tended to be used by the people who spoke it. Whereas a determinate language is actually a language which is negotiated by committees that get together to try to restrict language so that within a particular field we can use these terms in a manner that are agreed upon, restricted in a certain way, limited in a certain way. And as a result, we have like the word theory, the way that a police detective would use the word theory in a very determinate way is very different from the way, say, a research scientist would use the word theory, but they both use that word in a very determinate way within their respective fields. And unfortunately, one of the real serious problems of Christian theology and history is that the church has tried to take the New Testament and treat it as if it is actually written in a determinate language, and it isn't.
Exactly. I applaud your comments. For instance, when a scientist is talking about H2O, we can say H2O equals water, and another person can say the water was choppy today or the water was muddy today or whatever. They're not talking about apples and apples with what the scientist is talking about. So H2O is one argument that is pertaining to what water is. But when people start talking about, I had a lot of water today, it could be various things. And so we're all over the place. And so we are guilty of being all over the place in our theology. But my point is, if we carefully looked, not at the church, not at the church's failed meta language, but if we carefully look at what Christ was saying and look at the works of Christ, we will find him to simply be, in a sense, he was teaching semester by semester, trying to teach people better behavior, a reason to move forward, a reason to leave Jerusalem, a reason to think above their current circumstances, willing to empty himself of all the God notions, etc. I think that is wonderful. In fact, the Apostle Paul says, I'm moving from faith to faith. In other words, he's trying to teach people we need to have transition. We don't need to stay in fixed beliefs. And so I think that it would be more meaningful for the scientific community to applaud the works of Christ and applaud the works of Paul, because these works are awesome when understood, not through the church's eyes, but actually linguistically wise.
Yes.
My point, though, is what percentage of the population has your knowledge of the linguistics, has your knowledge of the grammar, the type and usage, in order to understand, what you read.
But the problem that we're getting into, I don't want to dismiss the works of Darwin, the works of Einstein, nor do I want to dismiss the works of Christ or Paul. But some people want to dismiss the works of Christ and Paul, and I think that is very disingenuous to how we
Randy,
move forward.
I think it's true that you're not, Dr. Jones has taken a lot of time to investigate linguistics and has come up with a variety of very, very specific insights. But not everyone has the time to become well schooled in linguistics. But I find that if you're talking to a rational person who has no background in linguistics and at least explain to them the sort of problems that we're up against, they can appreciate that. And so they can recognize through that appreciation that, well, let's not necessarily throw out some of these ancient documents. Let's just realize that the way we've been handling them isn't really very responsible.
Right. I applaud Dennis tonight, for instance. I'm so thankful that he left the church, because the church is guilty of giving us something that really doesn't represent the historical Christ, or the works of Christ, I should say. There are various questions that we do need to answer tonight, or even make comments on, and one of the comments that was made by O.B. Richardson. Dr. Jones, what do you think about Machen's Greek textbook? Which one do you recommend? When it comes to Greek grammar, I would not suggest, first of all, dealing with one textbook alone, nor would I use, for instance, I think that you wrote us actually a private message earlier. I think that you're getting ready to go to seminary. One thing that I would require of my professor, and I would require it hands down, don't teach me a gloss system that would get me into decoding. In other words, don't take me into a classroom with a built-in gloss system and not teach me the fundamentals of linguistics. And number two, don't teach me how to say the terms and not know how to speak the language. People are better off today learning how to speak Greek. In other words, when I get into debates with people, I would rather spend the first hour of the show speaking in Greek only and no English involved. But you don't find professors of Greek in most seminaries who can actually speak the language. They're simply teaching phonemes. They're teaching people how to sound terms out, and they can barely read it. They can't speak it. They're not fluent in the language. And I'm simply saying all people know, unless you're fluent in a language, you can't deal with the language. And this is a major, major concern within every seminary. And so make sure that your professor is fluent in Greek. That is, can have a conversation for 10 or 15 hours without looking at some cheat notes. And make sure that the person doesn't keep you in that particular book. I don't advocate that book at all. I think you're better off starting with classical Greek than going to seminary. That's my opinion, because in classical Greek, you're going to study Attic, Ionic, and Doric. And with that, I think you'll be able to comprise what koine is in a true sense of how language works, because truly no seminary that I know of actually deals with the structure of true linguistics at all. And so
Right.
hopefully that does help. Honey, would you read some of the comments that have been made tonight? They have been fantastic. And once again, I applaud Dennis. He seems like he's a guy in transition. He's just like the Apostle Paul. He's going to keep moving forward. That's wonderful,
Exactly.
Dennis.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Alrighty. Wow, let's see. Where do I start?
What she's looking for that, can I just mention something to OB?
Certainly.
I would even say that avoid anybody who has a strict grammatical approach, because grammar is more often than not based upon a study of the structures and the forms. And the truth is, we don't use language that way, in a way where we're loyal to forms. So that, there's grammar there, but deal with those who would recognize that it is actually used quite loosely. And so we need to go beyond the grammar and look at, as Dr. Jones was talking about, the more linguistic elements and functions of the way the language was used. And I certainly found that when I got a secular education in linguistics, that it just radically opened up my eyes to the absurdity and the rigidity of my previous education as being based on an illusion.
Right. And one of the things that you that will help you to understand what we're talking about here when it comes to Greek, because Bob is a wonderful linguist, no one needs to start out with religious Greek grammars, because a Greek grammar is a very deceptive in a religious context. There is no New Testament Greek grammar that's actually technically a grammar, because they do not deal with actually lexical and language theory. And technically, from a linguistic standpoint, if you're not dealing with linguistic and lexical theory, you're not dealing truly with grammar itself, because the only thing that they're doing is putting together several paradigms. You're going to waste most of your class time memorizing and being a parrot. That's all you're going to be, is a parrot. And these textbooks, and I know most of the authors, they write these textbooks for the sake of exegesis, not learning a language. And so I would be very, very cautious about going to a theological school. Number one, I would go to a better place, a place of enlightenment, and that would be called actually a university that doesn't have a bias and an agenda, where you can get good training in linguistics and also in different languages.
Yeah. A true story, Dr. Jones. I was translating Hezekiah 2:4 using strict grammar, and it ended up saying, "Drink more Ovaltine."
Honey, read some more comments.
Our producer is going to do that for me.
Okay, he's going to do it. Go for it, Joey.
All right, I'm just going to run through some of these from oldest to most recent. Christian Lucas says, perhaps the character of Yahweh is reflective of the Middle Earth cultures of the time. Oh, Middle Earth, sorry, Lord of the Rings fan. Middle Eastern cultures of the time, and not really who God is, but how people in Israel and Judea believed him to be at the time, so as to justify actions that were taken by leaders and people of the early Hebrews. And then he also says, but is the character of Yahweh much different than that of the gods in ancient Greece, of ancient Rome, or perhaps ancient Egypt or ancient Samaria? Charlie says, I guess this is concerning the people whose life God terminated prematurely in the Old Testament. But God created those people. If he knew they were going to be bad eggs, then why create them for the purpose of suffering? How cruel. Tessio says, what was Jesus, so what Jesus said was irrelevant, question mark. Let me just skip through some of these here. Okay. Charlie also says, Dennis, you said most of the variants are insignificant. Is there even one significant variation? And if so, how is that not relevant enough to say that the text may have contradictions? You guys can address any one of these when I'm done here. William T. Langle says, loving your patient manner. Dr. Jones, let's see. And Obie Richardson, you already read that one. Hitch slap Pensacola. Ugh. Hey, Can't stand that guy. Says, a perfect translation still equals a book. Can you show how this book becomes something more? I think that was in reference to you, Dr. Jones. Jay Fraze says, why does God allow mistranslations if the New Testament is really God's word? And then Hitch Slap once again comes back with 10 commandments are in the old, so I guess we should throw those out, question mark. And that is it for now.
Bob, did you have a comment on some of these comments?
I think that they're great comments. A lot of them bring up some interesting questions that I think that, at least for me, these are questions, many of them that have occurred to me that have actually brought me to a point, perhaps Dennis isn't quite there, I don't know, where I've just come to the point where I feel that this thing called the biblical text is a text that does exist. It's come to us from our history, but as I deal with it, it's a text written by people who thought that writing these things were worth saying, and as a result, I'm curious to read what it is they thought was worth saying. And as I've gotten deeper into it, I find that for me, a real key element is discovering that a lot of the things that have been claimed about what the biblical text is, when you really look at those particular verses, you begin to discover when you deal with it in a more honest linguistic manner, that the biblical text doesn't even claim to be what some of the more traditionalists are claiming the biblical text says about itself, which allows us to, I think, take the freedom of, let's just deal with this text for what it is and not turn it into anything special, demonic, good, bad, or it's a text. It's there. Let's struggle with it. Let's work with it. Let's recognize that it is written, but demystify the nature of the text, and that's certainly where I'm at, in terms of how I deal with it.
I think that if people would understand or would have understood the words of Christ, the words of Paul, I think that we would be so much farther ahead. But I think that people were afraid because religion imposed upon both Paul's work and the work of Christ. And so my point is, if scientists, I don't care whether you're an atheist or a theist, because I don't think that Jesus really wants to take an atheist and convert him. I don't think that was his agenda. His agenda was attempting to move us forward, creating better systems of behavior, etc. And the way that he was doing this was to encourage things that we're now doing. And I think that if we would have listened to Jesus 2,000 years ago, we would have been doing the kind of science that we are doing today, possibly in the 3rd or the 4th century. And so there is something about the text, to me, in my opinion, that's extraordinary, and I will discuss that soon. And I don't find that anything in history comes close to making the kind of sense that it does. And to me, it's an extraordinary, exceptional text. I want to go into that at some point soon. So I don't think it's just an average book. And so I would make the claim that it's, we can look at it from the church's eyes and use these failed models of meta-language and keep saying it's just a book. But I think that when you start looking at the rhythm of what Christ was saying and what Paul was saying, I think you're going to say that this is an exceptional find. This is wonderful. And it would have moved us forward so much quicker if we would have paid attention to it. But unfortunately, people would rather practice religious crap. And so that's why I applaud Dennis. Dennis, any other comments? We're almost at the end of the show.
Well, this might be a little off topic, but for some reason I was thinking about the tithing issue in relationship to the Old Testament versus the New Testament. Paul never mentions tithing. There's, people in the church, man, they're so big on money, and I think that's the number one issue that turns people off to church is all the hype on money. and they got to build these big buildings. The New Testament, the people were meeting in homes. Paul says the church in the house of so and so, the church in the house of so and so. They got away from the temple, they got away from the buildings. Today everybody's moved it back into the buildings, and you got to have a steeple and pews and a stage and a sound system, and we've lost the intimacy. We've lost the relationship of meeting in homes and having intimacy with each other, just like we're doing here. This is great. I love this forum right here because, all of us have the freedom to share our hearts and to speak. We're not sitting passively in a pew staring at the back of people's heads while, some pep rally goes on up on a stage, with a motivational speaker. We're here, we're relating, we're sharing ideas, and, nobody's dominating. Everybody's had freedom to speak what's on their hearts, and nobody's being kicked out of the church because they didn't agree with the pastor. So I love this.
That's brilliant.
I love the way that you're speaking. Go ahead, Bob.
Oh no, I just said that's wonderful. I totally concur with his sentiments. It's awesome. Yes.
Now, I personally love tithes, and let me explain. Let's go ahead and get the laugh over. I mean, I love tithing. I advocate tithing. I think it was the only sensible thing that the Jews did. And here's why. I think that the Richard Dawkins Foundation is a wonderful foundation. And for those of you who do not know Richard Dawkins, he's an atheist. And there are people who give percentage-wise to that foundation, and that's why that foundation is doing so many wonderful things. The same thing is true with universities. People come to me all the time and say, Dr. Jones, I hate tithing. And I ask them questions. Do you hate percentage giving? And I will follow it up with another question like, do you hate taxes? Yeah, we all hate taxes. But at the end of the day, no one likes potholes. We all like good highways to drive on. We love to have bridges. We love to have things. And it's true, unfortunately true, that you can't get people willing, just to say, I'm willing to give a certain amount of money to build a bridge or to maintain all the highways and keep the grass cut on the side of the roads and build universities. People just don't do that. And so reasonable people will get together and, say we do need percentage givers. And so that's why we have taxes. And we can fight taxes all day long, but each and every one of us loved what taxes provide. That is good highways, good bridges, and all kinds of things that keep us connected. And so I understand that, senators and congressmen, they do misspend our money. I agree. And I think that many people have misspent, quote unquote, the monies that have been given to churches, and that's unfortunate. But percentage giving isn't wrong. People who give percentage-wise on a monthly basis to the Red Cross are doing a wonderful thing for the Red Cross. There are many people who are giving to feeding the poor, and they do this on a habitual basis. And I think that anyone listening tonight, I would encourage you to find some foundation, something that you believe in, and start giving to that on a percentage basis, because people need support to move forward. For instance, the New Covenant Group, we don't move forward. We don't have this network because it doesn't cost anybody any money. We have people who are willing to say, hey, yeah, we're going to be responsible. We're going to put things together, and we're going to keep buying things so we can have a wonderful community. But as Dennis stated, you've got some people who want to take leadership and want to make sure everyone else does what they do. But here's the New Covenant Group, we don't.
Charlie made a comment, and he says, very sensible, Doc. let's just stop calling it tithing, please. Ugh, too much baggage.
I agree with that. Let's just call it percentage giving. And so, I think that Richard Dawkins, he receives a lot of tithes and offerings, and I'm proud for him because he's doing a wonderful job. You can't take that away from him.
Now, here's another soundbite for you. I'm an atheist and I support tithing. If you are in part of a community and you believe in it and you support it, you should give something to increase that. When I was involved in the church, that's one thing that drove me absolutely crazy was the people that wouldn't give. My ex-wife, I figured if she's going to have me go to church, I'm going to, and I'm going to be part of this community, I'm going to support it. But that didn't seem to be the popular conviction. I mean, some people did. They did it faithfully, no problem. I figured if I'm going to be part of it, it's, to me, I perceived it as part of the rules. I had no problem with it. Right now, obviously, I don't attend a church, but I give regularly. I have a percentage of my paycheck that goes to a charitable fund every single week.
Yeah.
I give to charities and so forth. I think tithing, if you want to, even with the baggage, I think it's a wonderful idea.
Yeah. I mean, people building meaningful community, they need funds to do so, like the Free Thinkers Association, whatever association that you're part of. Learn to be committed to it. Give. It takes money to go around the block. I made a statement a while ago, and I need to clarify it. I was just trying to nuance a point. There's one thing that the Jews did right, and that would be to create a system of tithing. They did many things right. Jesus wasn't against all of the Jewish practices. He was just rebuking a handful of the practices. They fed the poor. They took care of the widows. They did amazing things for people. They had a collective society that learned how to work together. And at some point, I want to talk about that. And so if anybody got offended by my point, I was just trying to exaggerate the point to make the point well. But I do appreciate, Randy, your point. As an atheist, I believe in tithing, or let's use another word, percentage giving. It works. And, we can argue all day long. And one guy said to me, I hate taxes. And I said, well, drive through a handful of potholes and claim that you despise taxes. And I understand that taxes do, sometimes get misused, but that's subsequent to the issue of percentage giving. Bob, did you want to make a point on tithing?
Oddly enough, even back when I was a fundamentalist, my view on giving, I could not jump into the concept that somehow by people giving, they're giving to God, except in a sense of gratitude, or that somehow God is going to bless them. And whenever it came to that time during the service when I was a pastor, where I was announcing that the offering plate, I would try to make the point, if you like this ministry, if you feel that this is useful and meaningful, well, that's wonderful, but we just can't exist without somehow paying the bills. And so if you give to the church here $20, the one thing I can promise you is this: you will be out $20 and we will have $20 with which to accomplish our common goals. So if this is worth it to you that we exist, we really do need your giving. And so we need to think in terms of the practical reality that there's also something about a generous lifestyle, that if you decide that your lifestyle is going to include a certain amount of giving, there's something about that helps you to manage the rest of your affairs with a little more wisdom, because you realize I'm deliberately deciding to do with less.
I so agree. Dennis, your final comment for tonight.
I just loved it. I really enjoyed the fellowship and the discussions, and I think it was outstanding. My final thought would be, somebody had wrote a question about, is what Jesus said insignificant? No, it was very significant, but I think we have to put it again in its context, that he was dealing mainly with the Jews and not with the New Testament assemblies. It's a different message for a different time. It wasn't meant to be for the church. And I agree with what you said on about giving, especially taxes, because taxes are basically the same thing as the Old Testament tithes. So when we pay taxes, we are tithing to the community and supporting people, supporting Medicare and Medicaid and potholes and all the other stuff you mentioned. I think it's a waste of time to be building church buildings. I think was my main point is that
Amen. Amen.
They got a church secretary and all this overhead for a building that's opened a couple hours a week. It's a complete waste of money. I'd rather see people meeting in homes, what people call today home churches, than building cathedrals and stained glass windows.
Yes. I so agree with that. I applaud that. We need to unchurch as many people as possible. Randy, you've made some powerful points tonight. I want you to give us your final thoughts.
Oh, boy, where to begin? I like the view of the church as a community, not as a building, not as a structure. I think that churches are wonderful things individually. Groups of people coming together to help each other, to move themselves forward, to promote, caring, to promote education, and so on. I think it's a great thing. I have worlds of problems with, the religious aspect of it. And I'm still waiting for Dr. Jones and for Bob to give me their definition of the higher power that they believe to exist. That I'm looking forward to that night when we have that discussion.
I'm looking forward to it. That's wonderful. Honey, your final thoughts.
Well, to start with, wasn't Dennis in like a cool room? It looks like a sauna.
Yeah,
It's
I
like
like
a sauna.
that. I'm rather jealous.
Yeah, I am too. I think that's awesome. I really appreciated a lot of his comments, and especially about the church and the excesses that have come from the church, and when we could be feeding people and meeting in homes or doing whatever. I think that's really brilliant, and I think Bob had a lot of good words, and you did too, of wisdom for Dennis, and he's gone through this journey and he's still going, and we are too. And the number one thing I really liked about what Dennis said is this camaraderie and fellowship. We could say whatever we wanted to tonight, and we all didn't agree, but nobody, excommunicated us or threw us out or said, shut up, woman, you're not allowed to speak. And
You don't have to sit on the other side.
that's right. I didn't have to sit on the other side away from the guys. And so we've come a long way, baby. And so I'm glad. And I'm glad Dennis brought that out. That's
Yeah.
what it is about. And Randy's really big on community. And I think that's what we should be about.
I'm very, very thankful for all the atheists who have come our way, because they have improved our lives. They have given us, the desire to have meaningful community, and it's almost like having a revival in a sense. And I hate to use that term, but it's energetic. When, for instance, Jack is here tonight, every time that he walks through the doors, he's always saying, Dr. Jones, look what I did this last week, etc. That is awesome.
Yeah, he's very much an encourager.
Exactly. And, Sean,
Yeah.
he comes in, he has all kinds of things, and what he has done today has been amazing. And I can't brag enough about the atheist, and then I can't leave out the theist. Dennis tonight was all about we need to have authentic fellowship, in the homes. He's looking for something that's real. And I think that all of us are, and
Right.
that's what we really need. Did you have another comment?
Yeah, Charlie has a fantastic idea. Charlie says, can Randy close us in prayer tonight? So
That would be wonderful, Randy. So we're going to dismiss, and our atheist on the panel, he's going to dismiss us in prayer. And you say whatever you want to, okay? Go ahead. Thank you.
All right. Well, I want to give thanks to each and every one that is here participating and listening and taking part in this fellowship. I think it makes us all stronger. I think it makes us all better. It makes us all wiser. And I think if we continue forward in this vein and educate more people, things can only get better.
Amen.
Amen. I applaud that. The prayers of an atheist.
That's right.
That's amazing. I love that. Thank you guys for your time. Good night.
Good night. Thank you very much, Doctor.
All right.
Okay, we love you so much.
Yep. Come back, Dennis.
Amen.
Thanks,
Thank
Bob.
you again.
Thank you.
Good night.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been another great night here at the place. We hope you'll join us again on Wednesdays starting at 7 with the Unconventional Pastor and Dr. Jones to follow. And then Sunday we do this all over again from 10 to 10. And it's going to be another exciting Sunday next week.